How Ethiopia successfully resisted colonization. Hello Displorers, welcome to another informative video presented to you by Displar, and thanks for watching. In this video we shall examine how Ethiopia successfully resisted colonization. Ethiopia along with Liberia were the only African countries that were not colonized by Europeans. It was not that European powers were not interested in colonizing Ethiopia, but Ethiopia was able to resist attempts of colonization by the British, and particularly by the Italians. Indeed, Italy was able to colonize a part of ancient Ethiopia along the Red Sea, now Eritrea. Under the leadership of Emperor Menelik, Ethiopia resisted European attempts to colonize all the Ethiopia. Ethiopia won a decisive victory over Italy at the Battle of Adwa in December 1895. During the battle, approximately 4,000 Italian soldiers were killed. Italy most certainly put up a strong fight, but Ethiopia's defense proved strong. The intricacies of how this was able to happen was a long plan with a strong backing, and hence in this video, we shall examine how it happened. But first, if you're new here, welcome. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. African resistance, nationalism, and independence. There were a variety of responses on the part of African peoples to colonial rule. Supporters of colonialism in Europe claimed that the average African person welcomed colonialism. Colonialism, they argued, brought the end of slavery in East and Central Africa and brought a stop to inter-kingdom warfare in parts of West Africa. While there is some truth to claim that the colonialism brought peace to a few areas in Africa, and that there were some peoples who were initially thankful for an end to violence in the areas, the historical evidence does not support the claim that there was widespread support for colonial rule. Indeed, there was also considerable evidence of strong resistance to colonial rule. By the beginning of the World War I in 1914, all of Africa with the exception of Liberia and Ethiopia had been colonized, and initial African resistance had been overcome by the colonial powers. Over the next decade, as colonial rule became institutionalized, African resistance to colonialism became more focused and intense. By the 1950s, there were organized nationalist parties that demanded political independence in almost every colony in Africa. In this final section of this module, we will look at four phases of African reaction to colonial rule: early resistance, demand for equity and inclusion, nationalism or mass movement, and struggle for national liberation. Early resistance to colonialism. Early African reaction to European intrusion into Africa in the late 19th century was not uniform. A few groups that had suffered from long-term warfare or slave raiding gave an uncertain welcome to European presence in their regions, in hope that there would be peace. Other groups strongly resisted the coming of the European political control. However, many people had no initial reaction to colonialism. This was because in the early years, colonialism had little impact on the lives of many rural African peoples. This situation changed as the impact of colonialism became more widespread and intense in the middle decades of the 20th century. Ethiopia was amongst those who resisted European colonization in all forms, defeating the Italian army in the Battle of Adwa 124 years ago. On the first day of March 124 years ago, traditional warriors, farmers, and pastoralists, as well as women, defeated the well-armed Italian army in the northern town of Adwa in Ethiopia. The outcome of this battle ensured Ethiopia's independence, making it the only African country never to be colonized. Adwa turned Ethiopia into a symbol of freedom for black people globally. It also led to a change of government in Italy. The town of Adwa is located in northern Tigray, closer to the southern border of Eritrea. The battle between Ethiopia and Italy took place in the mountainous terrain of the area. Adwa still stands as witness to what ordinary Africans can do when they come together as farmers, pastoralists, women, and rural people, and also workers and artists. They are able to score a decisive victory against global colonialist forces. Since the beginning of slavery and colonialism in the 16th century, similar battles have occurred around the world. The outcome of every war was the same. Europeans ended up ruling the native people of the Americas, Africa, Asia, and Australia. Ethiopia stood as the antithesis of the colonial worldview. Regarded as the origin of humankind, it was, according to Harvard professor Ephraim Isaac, about 10,000 years ago, one single nation or community of a single linguistic group. The people spoke an Afro-Asian language, which is the origin of almost all languages currently spoken in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. Ethiopians developed the Ge'ez or Ethiopic writing system. From the 4th century, and indigenous Christianity, Orthodox Tewahedo, developed through the synthesis of belief in the Ark of the Covenant, the Gospel, and ancient traditional practices. The Keber Nagis, the national epic that elaborates this belief, provided the basis for the emergence of a Solomonic dynasty that incorporates diverse lands and cultures into one country. Muslim immigrants were welcomed and protected by the Christian king in the 7th century. In the 19th century, the 3 successive kings, namely Emperor Theodosius of Gondar, Johannes of Tigray, and Menelik of Showa, sought to centralize their power. The road to Adwa. A decade before the Battle of Adwa, European powers had decided the fate of Ethiopia. At the Berlin Conference of 1884-5, 14 European countries divided Africa amongst themselves. Before the conference, only about 10% of Africa was controlled by Europeans. The remaining 90% was ruled by indigenous and traditional rulers. Italy had the colonial possession over Assab Port since 1882. At the Berlin Conference, European colonial powers agreed that Italy could take over Ethiopia as its future colony. Italy expanded its presence in the Red Sea, an area that had become important since the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869. With British support, Italy took control of the port city of Massawa in 1885. From Massawa, Italy moved slowly inland, leading to a number of clashes with locals, which culminated in the Battle of Adwa. Italy suffered heavy defeat, but this didn't deter them. Italy's expansion across Ethiopia was facilitated by the devastation caused by rinderpest, an infectious viral disease that killed up to 90% of the country's livestock. Famine and disease wiped out a third of the population between 1888 and 1892. This period is regarded as Kifuken evil days. Italy took advantage of the devastation and sought to divide and conquer Ras Mangasha of Tigray and Negus Menelik of Showa. The Italians eventually signed the Treaty of Wuchale with Menelik in May 1889. The treaty was written in Amharic and Italian. The treaty would later be the trigger for the Battle of Adwa. Menelik was to discover that the language in the 2 versions of the treaty differed. The Italian version effectively made Ethiopia Italy's protectorate, in contrast to the Amharic version. Preparing for war. As the tragic devastation of the Kifuken eased, Menelik began preparing for war against the Italians. On February 27, 1893, he renounced the Treaty of Wuchale. He then ordered the creation of food depots and major towns along the way to Adwa for the upkeep of his army. The Italians fortified their positions in Tigray, attacking Mangasha at Quartet on January 13, 1895. On September 17, 1895, Menelik declared a total mobilization of war against Italy. He called on all the Ethiopians to defend their country, family, and religion. He ordered every capable person to fight, and those incapable to pray for Ethiopia's victory. Ethiopians from every tribe, culture, and community answered Menelik's call. Regional leaders from diverse ethnic and cultural backgrounds responded unanimously, creating an army of 100,000 with inferior weapons, but a strong cause. The battle. The first showdown occurred at Amba Alagi on December 7, 1895, where a relatively smaller Italian army was wiped out. The second encounter was at Mekele, where the Italians were stationed behind a strong fort. The Ethiopians surrounded the Italians for 2 weeks, and upon Empress Taitu's advice, cut off the fort's water supply. The Italian commander agreed to surrender if they would allow them to leave with their firearms. Menelik agreed that they could leave the garrison unharmed, but the Italians remained in their strongholds, fortifying their position at Adigrat and Soria. Menelik was not in a hurry to attack this fort. After 2 weeks of inactivity, General Baratieri decided to advance for a surprise attack. This was on March 1, 1896, or according to the Ethiopian calendar, Hekate 23, 1888, the day of St. George. The priests carried the tabot, a replica of the Ark of the Covenant, a religious icon that symbolizes the sanctity of Ethiopia, to the battlefield. The 20,000 Italian and Italian-trained native troops were advanced in 3 columns. They fought bravely with their cannons and machine guns before facing a decisive defeat. Casualties were severe on both sides. One of the key leaders of the Ethiopian forces was Etage Taitu Bitol, wife of Emperor Menelik, a fearless strategist and brilliant administrator. She led 6,000 cavalry to the war front and employed traditional music and war chants that motivated the fighting spirit of the warriors. The impact. The Adwa victory led to a change of government in Italy. Due to public protest and failure of his colonial policy, Prime Minister Francesco Crispi resigned. Negotiations between the two countries resulted in the Addis Ababa Treaty. One of its key components was the unconditional acceptance of Ethiopian independence and sovereignty. News of an African victory spread throughout the world. Adwa turned Ethiopia into the symbol of redemption and freedom for black people. Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Bob Marley, George Padmore, and others drew inspiration from the African victory. The first Afro-Brazilian newspaper was named O Menelik, publishing pride in black identity and African connection with prominent women writers from 1915 to 1916. Adwa connected black people with Africa's ancient glory and future hope. As Marcus Garvey wrote, "Look to Africa for the crowning of a black king. He shall be the Redeemer." The green, yellow, and red Ethiopian flag was adopted by several African countries after colonial liberation, and a universal national anthem was created for black people. Although the Ethiopian death toll was far lower than that of the Italians, Menelik dared not gamble his victory away and immediately retreated to Addis Ababa. After the humiliating defeat, Italy was finally forced to recognize Ethiopia's independence. Prime Minister Crispi, on the other hand, was forced to resign from his position immediately after news of the fiasco reached Italy. Ethiopia became the only African country to successfully resist European colonization. There you have it, explorers. That was how Ethiopia successfully resisted colonization. Thanks for watching this video, and if you did enjoy this video, do well to give it a thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe and share with your friends.